history and coming forth of the Book of Mormon. Matt co-authored several farms papers, including Alma 710, Birthplace of Jesus Christ, published numerous articles in BYU Studies, Farm Review Books, and the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies. Matt Roper's presentation is entitled Nephi's Neighbors, Some LDS Perspectives on Book of Mormon Peoples and Pre-Columbian Populations. With that, I'd like to welcome Matt Roper.
The Book of Mormon recounts the migration of 3 small colonies from the Old World to the New. 2 of these were Israelites that migrated to an American land of promise around 600 BC. Many contemporary Latter-day Saints understand the Book of Mormon as reflecting events which occurred in the relatively restricted region of ancient Mesoamerica. During and after those events, according to this view, migrants from these lands may have spread throughout other parts of North and South America, carrying ideas and elements of Mesoamerican culture as well as genes. However, they also believe that pre-Columbian populations of the Americas include within their ancestry many other groups than those mentioned in the Book of Mormon text. Recently, some vocal critics of the Church of Jesus Christ have complained that Latter-day Saint scholars, especially those associated with farms, reinterpret Lamanite identity in the latter part of the 20th century. Those who now hold such views implicitly reject long-standing popular Mormon beliefs, including those held by Joseph Smith about Lamanites being the ancestors of today's American Indians. That's a quote. Of course, it is not popular beliefs, long-standing or otherwise, that are central to Latter-day Saint foundations, but revealed Scripture. Such characterizations also suggest a basic misunderstanding of the central issue for Latter-day Saints. The key question is not whether Native Americans are descendants of Israel, but whether their ancestors are exclusively Israelite. The Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants testify of a latter-day remnant of those people described in that record and their prophetic destiny. These scriptures also suggest that this remnant may be found among Native American groups known to Joseph Smith and others and elsewhere. But while these revelations affirm an Israelite component to Native American ancestry, they never quantify how many Native American ancestors were Israelite, nor do they deny the presence of other indigenous peoples in pre-Columbian America. In 1993, Elder Dallin H. Oaks made the following observations to students of the Book of Mormon. Speaking for a moment as one whose profession is advocacy, I suggest that if one is willing to acknowledge the importance of faith and the reality of a realm beyond human understanding, the case for the Book of Mormon is the stronger case to argue. The case against the historicity of the Book of Mormon has to prove a negative. You do not prove a negative by prevailing on one debater's point or by establishing some subsidiary arguments. For me, this obvious insight goes back over 40 years to the first class I took on the Book of Mormon at Brigham Young University. Here I was introduced to the idea that the Book of Mormon is not a history of all the people who have lived on the continents of North and South America in all ages of the earth. Up to that time, I had assumed that it was. If that were the claim of the Book of Mormon, any piece of historical, archaeological, or linguistic evidence to the contrary would weigh in against the Book of Mormon, and those who rely exclusively on scholarship would have a promising position to argue. In contrast, if the Book of Mormon purports to be an account of a few peoples who inhabited a portion of the Americas during a few millennia in the past, the burden of argument changes drastically. It is no longer a question of all versus none. It is a question of some versus none. In other words, in the circumstance I described, the opponents of historicity must prove that the Book of Mormon has no historical validity for any peoples who lived in the Americas in a particular time frame, a notoriously difficult exercise. One does not prevail on that proposition by proving that a particular culture represents migrations from Asia. The opponents of historicity of the Book of Mormon must prove that the people whose religious life it records did not live anywhere in the Americas. Although spoken 11 years ago, Elder Oaks' observations were prescient in that they underscore a fatal weakness in contemporary arguments against the Book of Mormon. Critics assume, for example, that genetic evidence, any genetic evidence taken from any Native American population, must be shown to be Israelite, or the Book of Mormon's claims are false. But there is no reason for Latter-day Saints to assume that Native American lineages and ancestors must be exclusively Israelite. In regards to the nature and identity of Lehis people, Latter-day Saints have, and no doubt will continue to hold, a variety of opinions and interpretations. But whether some Native Americans, or many Native Americans, or even all Native Americans have Lehi as an ancestor, it does not follow that they did not have others. Today I'd like to review the early development of Latter-day Saint ideas about Book of Mormon demography. And by demography, I mean the nature of pre-Columbian populations as they may or may not relate to Book of Mormon peoples or their descendants. First, I'll address the assumption that the Book of Mormon requires that all Native American peoples are exclusively descended from Israel, noting the work of Latter-day Saints who have understood the Book of Mormon to allow for the presence of other pre-Columbian peoples not specifically identified in the text. That evidence will show that this is not a recent idea, but an interpretation that has long been entertained and discussed in Latter-day Saint literature, both in the 19th and 20th centuries. Second, I will address several potential objections to the view that there were others in the land in pre-Columbian times. Finally, I will discuss scriptural evidence for this view, which I'm persuaded makes best sense under the assumption of other pre-Columbian peoples in an American land of promise. Latter-day Saints have long been open to the idea that other peoples may have migrated to the Americas either before, during, or after the events of the Book of Mormon, and that these groups intermingled with those of Israelite descent. The idea of other pre-Columbian migrations to the Americas has a long history and can be traced back to the earliest generation of Latter-day Saints. For the September 15, 1842 issue, the editor of the Times and Seasons cited favorably an account of Don Juan Torres, grandson of the last king of the Quiche Maya, which affirmed, "The Toltecs themselves descended from the house of Israel, who were released by Moses from the tyranny of Pharaoh, and after crossing the Red Sea, fell into idolatry. To avoid the reproofs of Moses, or from fear of his inflicting upon them some chastisement, they separated from him and his brethren, and under the guidance of Tanut, their chief, passed from one continent to the other, to a place which they call the Seven Caverns, a part of the Kingdom of Mexico, where they founded the celebrated city of Tula. Whether such a migration ever took place or not," states Hugh Nibley, "it is significant that the prophet was not reluctant to recognize the possibility of other migrations than those mentioned in the Book of Mormon." This interest in additional migrations to the Americas seems to have persisted among Latter-day Saints. In 1852, the Deseret News cited with interest an account of purported migration to America 300 years before Columbus. Orson Pratt interpreted the promises found in the Book of Ether regarding other nations inheriting the land as referring to pre-Columbian migrants to the Americas after the Nephite destruction at Cumorah. Orson Pratt says, "Now these same decrees, which God made in relation to the former nations that inhabited this country, extend to us. Whatever nation, the Lord said, shall possess this land from this time henceforth and forever, shall serve the only true and living God, or they shall be swept off when the fullness of his wrath shall come upon them. Since this ancient decree by Moroni, there are many nations who have come here, and lastly, Europeans have come from what is termed the Old World across the Atlantic." Now, it's significant that Pratt, who was one of the earliest converts to Mormonism and did much to popularize the so-called hemispheric model of Book of Mormon geography in the 19th century, apparently had no difficulty asserting that many other nations came to the Americas in the interval between Nephite destruction and the European arrival. While Pratt never seems to have explored the demographic implications of this view, it is clear that such migrations would significantly expand the meaning of the term Lamanite to include many pre-Columbian groups and peoples and lineages in addition to those descended from Lehi or Mulek. In an article published in 1875, George Ottinger explored the idea advanced by some scholars of the day, suggesting that the Phoenicians may have helped to colonize the Americas in pre-Columbian times. After surveying this literature, he concluded that the Phoenicians at one time held intercourse with Jared's people. In 1887, another Latter-day Saint writer surmised that both Lehi's people and the Jaredites were contemporary co-workers in the work of civilizing the Aborigines of the Promised Land. Note the reference to Aborigines before the Jaredites. He viewed the account of Mosiah's union with the people of Zarahemla as evidence for the existence of indigenous people already in the land when they arrived. Mosiah who had to teach the Nephite language to the Zarahemlans. For though the parents of both people had come from Jerusalem at about the same time, and must have then had the same verbiage, their offspring took rather to their mothers, as was but natural.